Hey everyone, it is Yishan here. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about the announcement Konami made regarding the Time Wizard rules. So I'm a little late to this already, even though it's only been a couple of days, but this has caused a lot of outrage in the community, specifically this bolded part, which is starting at the North American World Championship qualifier. Current game mechanics and current card text will be used for Time Wizard events. Now, a lot of people are pretty mad about this because, of course, let's read what is Time Wizard. It says Time Wizard events use the available cards, forbidden and limited lists, and rules regarding drawing on the first turn and the dueling field of the selected Time Wizard format. Hilariously, the currently errated cards were actually not available during the selected Time Wizard format. But I'm just arguing semantics here. That is the thing. So let's talk about why Konami might do this. We have to at least give them some credit and not just say that they're just doing this to piss people off. I I I honestly think that Konami, in their heart of hearts, believes that this will attract more people to play the Time Wizard formats. That's what I truly believe. That's maybe a hot take, but I think that they think that modern players are more likely to enjoy Time Wizard when the cards work the way that modern players would expect them to work. So right, they've gotten rid of priority, basically, right? They've gotten rid of other important things is they've gotten rid of the field spell rules. I think if I read this correctly, you can only have one field spell at a time. And so, or sorry, you can have, I misspoke there. You can have, each player can have a field spell. And the cards that are being used can be looked up in the quote unquote official Yu-Gi-Oh database so that the card text is accurate. And I think they think this will make these formats more popular. I think that also they are maybe looking at this as just not as competitive of a format. They're saying like, well, this is like there's something fun you can do. You just play some older cards and call it a day. And we're not really like we don't want to be supporting this as a competitive format, even though I feel like sort of these retro formats ride that line between competition and fun. And actually, I think that's why a lot of people enjoy it. They sort of almost ride it better than some of the modern formats. But I think that's why Konami is doing this. Now, whether that'll work, I think, is up for debate. I think the answer is, honestly, if I'm being unbiased, I think modern players, a lot of them, just have no attachment to any of these formats, right? I think a lot of the truth is most Edison players and Goat players, and I guess this is Tengu players, play this because it is some form of nostalgia. And maybe from Konami's perspective, nostalgia is limited. If the player didn't play during, April 2014 or April 2010 or July 2005, they're just not going to play. And so they can't grow the player base, or at least the potential player base. Right. So that I think sums it up. And maybe you could say something about judging, but honestly, I have always felt that that's a sort of a poor reason. To be honest, almost all of the rulings for these formats can be looked up online in 30 seconds if you know where to look. And so honestly, I think that's kind of a weak argument. But in terms of getting more players into the format, I think that I can see where they're coming from. The question is, will it work? And the answer is, of course, maybe. I mean, who knows whether it'll work? I think that the issue is that it feels like they're fighting their community. I think to formats like Commander in Magic the Gathering, or other player created formats, and I see other companies, instead of running with it, like instead of fighting the player base and trying to control it, they just run with it. That is maybe a little concerning, honestly. And I don't envy Konami's position, because they want to make money off this format, and that's the goal of any company, is to make money. And they are trying to increase their player base and trying to, I think the only way they can make money from these formats is to basically reprint equity, right? And hopefully getting more players into the modern game. That has really been the two main things. One, reprint equity, right? And two, getting more players to playing modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, if you look at it from that perspective, it makes sense because, okay, you can learn this simpler version of Yu-Gi-Oh! They've tried Speed Duel, and I'm going to be honest, I don't think it worked that well. They've tried Rush Duel, and I'm going to be honest, I don't think it worked that well. So they're looking at Time Wizard and saying, hey, what if we just changed the cards to work like how they work now? And this will be like almost like a great stepping stone for bringing people into modern Yu-Gi-Oh! It's something that's a little easier to understand, right? And it's easier to bring players into modern Yu-Gi-Oh! So I think that's how Konami is looking at it. I do not believe in my heart of hearts that they are just throwing up a big middle finger to old school retro players. I truly think that this is some of their reasons, is that maybe like, oh, we can get people into the game this way, into playing modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, into sort of buying packs, and so I can't fault them for that. However, I don't know if this will turn out the way they want it to, because they've basically made two different formats. I don't think it's fair to call these formats the same thing anymore. So, for example, like from now on, people have been saying like, is it Edison V1 or Edison V2? I think we should just call Edison, and this Konami creation April 2010 Time Wizard, and the same for GOAT and July 2005 Time Wizard. Like, from now on, if I say July 2005 Time Wizard, I'm going to be referring to this Konami created format. And if I say Edison, I'm going to be referring to sort of like the player created, or the one that the original format, I guess you could say. So that's my thoughts on why Konami has done this. So whether or not you agree or disagree with the change, I think it's important to step back and say why. Now, what will happen? I think there are some things that are trickier to think about, which is, what about the current Edison players? The ones that are probably playing Edison, they're going to spend money on reprints of Edison or retro cards. But to be honest, their chances of going back to modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Are basically zero, or very, very low. Although I will say, I know a couple Edison players in my community that are at least somewhat interested in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! So it's not like it's a failed experiment, or they're not converting anyone at all. I know some people are sort of interested. So I don't think it's like, oh, if we don't change the rules, no one will ever be interested in modern. That's not true. Some people are actually interested, but that's a whole nother discussion. So, how do these sort of maybe enfranchised retro format players feel? And I think the overall reaction, well, is kind of negative, in the sense that it feels like Konami doesn't really care about you. And so I can't blame them for that decision. Because I feel like in terms of what retro players give to OTSs, we give honestly very little to OTSs, right? A lot of times we are playing these sort of cheap locals, not really buying any new product. And honestly, I think the stores probably don't get that much return on investment from hosting retro formats, even if they may be massively popular. I wish there was a way we could solve that. I wish we instead just, pushed more retro product. And I think, players will buy Rarity Collection. Retro players will buy Rarity Collection if there's good stuff in there. There's no question. And so in those senses, we can help out our local game stores that way. But otherwise, honestly, like those sets are already pretty popular, and so I don't really think that they really, like, the stores needed the retro players to boost sales for those sets. So I would have preferred a solution if it was about like if we could help our OTS stores better. I would have preferred a solution to somehow make it more profitable for OTS stores to run Time Wizard events. I don't know what the solution for that is. That's a tricky problem, and so I'm curious to hear any suggestions. But I think that's one thing we have to consider. Second thing is stores are also in a tricky spot, right? Where now they're supposed to host Time Wizard and they're supposed to follow new rules, but I can imagine a lot of players protesting. And maybe, Konami views this as well. The stores didn't make that much money off of it anyway, so they probably don't care that much. But I think a lot of people that own card shops do it for the love of the community. Let's be honest, the card shop business is not a one with high success rate, and also probably not the easiest business to run. If you're going to run a business and you only cared about making money, there are probably thousands of other choices that are much more likely to succeed. And so, I think a lot of card shop owners, if, again, this is maybe a little positive or maybe too wide-eyed and bushy-tailed, but I think a lot of store owners want to have a thriving community. And if the community wants to play basically Edison or Goat or Tengu or Redo, and they want to play it the way people played it back then a lot of store owners are going to have their hands tied and say, well, like, what am I supposed to do here? And they may just host Edison events anyway and just hope that, Konami doesn't care that much, basically. So I think that is kind of a sucky position to be as a store, because let's say this does succeed, right? Let's say everyone all of a sudden is, all of a sudden playing this new Time Wizard April 2010, and some of them are converted to Modern. Is that really going to make that much of a difference, especially if you lose a ton of old retro players when it comes to profitability? In my mind, that seems unlikely. That seems like it's better for Konami as a whole and not as good for the local game store. But I could be wrong about that. These are just sort of hand-wavy arguments. So yeah, when it comes to my personal opinion, I also think that, like, it doesn't really make... The other sort of thing that concerns me is that we are just changing these formats entirely and we are not really balancing them. Like, where is the line, right? Where do we stop and say, well, we changed basically how the cards work. What's stopping them from changing the ban list again, right? Like, they're just changing the cards completely. A ton of very high impactful cards. I may go over some of the Edison ones, but like, yeah, let's talk about them now, because let's do this, right? Let's go take a look at this. I think I made a little Edison deck profile here with all the cards, basically. So not all of them, but a decent sized chunk of them that are changing. Like Raiko is a huge change. First of all, it doesn't make Dupe Frog miss timing, and second of all, you can't negate it with Stardust anymore because the destruction is optional on resolution. That's how the card works now. Sangan, another big one, basically you can't use the card you searched in the same turn. So like these things where we're using modern erratas really suck. Like, honestly, if they just changed priority and the field spells rule, then I think that this format would honestly look pretty similar still. But the fact that we are erratating cards that honestly probably didn't need to be errated, like Treeborn Frog didn't need an errata. Sangan, honestly, the card should have just stayed banned if they thought it was that broken. Raiko, kind of like, okay, this card's been errated 15 million times. Just can we, why are we doing that to a card that doesn't really need to be errated that much? Rescue Cat, this card could be unbanned today with its original text, I think, without issue. I added Caius here because, again, I guess one other rule change is how chain links work. So, you can go chain link 1. If you tribute Caius for Sangan, you can go chain link 1 Caius, chain link 2 Sangan now. I think that's not that big a deal, but it is another rule change. Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon, this card, I understand, actually might have been too powerful in Modern. Although, honestly, it's probably just because the guard dragons, when they printed them, were broken. I honestly don't even know if this card in its original text would see play without the guard dragons. Future Fusion, okay, this card's probably deserved to stay banned, not gonna lie. But like, you know, we're neutering this card, like we're just completely destroying people. You know, it's not really a ban list, but basically it is. Like Future Fusion makes dragons pretty like unplayable. Brain Control is like a slight errata, but it definitely changes the format. I only added My Body as a shield here because cards like My Body as a shield and Starlight Road can now be used in the damage step. So now they can, well, My Body shield still cannot negate Raikou because it might not destroy a monster. But, you know, I hate this card, by the way. I should make a video about how much I hate this card in Edison. Necro Valley is much stronger. So, I mean, they basically just changed the format. So, like, if they had just changed the priority and the field spell, like, the format would look pretty similar. And honestly, even if they wanted to change this whole goes in and rivalry rulings, the format, it would still be somewhat recognizable, I think. But now it's not really. It's just totally different. And so when does it stop, I guess? Like, as a retro player, one thing that I really liked was that my cards are going to be the same and everything is going to work the same forever. And there is just no changing it. And I can be confident that my deck today is going to be my deck tomorrow. Now with this, we've kind of, if we accept this, we're kind of accepting that change can happen at any time. And that for a retro format is kind of a scary thought. The whole reason I like retro is that, or at least one of the draws, is that my deck works the same when I play it today or 1 year from now. Other erratas like Goyo Guardian, like this is another example of an errata that did not need to happen. Like, why did this happen? This card could be its original text and have no problem. I'd rather they just errata it back to what it originally was. Same with Brain Control. If they want to do that, like maybe I'd feel a little better. Like, you know, this card is worse than Change of Heart, and Change of Heart is unbanned. So yeah, I mean, it's just crazy. Okay, Brionic, honestly, this is one of the few cards similar to some other cards where this card probably would still need to be banned if it wasn't errated. But I mean, Brionic is it's kind of fun to play with these cards in these formats in their original versions. Armor Arm Colossal, this is like another one of those Edison rulings where like in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! This does not work because the Colossal Fighter is Chainlink 2 and the Army Arm is Chainlink 1, and the Army Arm actually has to check the monster in the graveyard. So that doesn't exist, and so you don't inflict any damage, so it doesn't work in modern. But it's kind of I think this is kind of a cool interaction, Edison. And the Stardust Dragon, just basically, you know, its interaction with Raikou, and then of course like Absolute Zero getting returned to the extra deck by either like Brionic or Compulsory. I mean, this is a pretty big change, but not as groundbreaking as some of the other ones. So anyway, I guess that's my summary. I'm not really a fan because I think their intentions are pure, and that they want more people to play retro and play Yu-Gi-Oh! In general, but I just think that they are alienating so much of a player base and honestly sort of destroying the integrity of the format, because you can argue as much as you want, but this will be a pretty humongous change, and it's almost unrecognizable, I think, after this. So that's all I got. I think, you know, let's be respectful. I think Konami has their heart in the right place, but you can always again vote with your wallet and your time. If you do not, you know, engage with the community or engage with the events, they will notice and eventually either probably revert it or, you know, do something. But until then, you know, just try your best, enjoy what you can, and don't get mad at your LGS if they feel like they have to run with Konami's new rules, and maybe give it a shot, I guess. But, you know, it's not their fault. All right, I will see you guys all next time. I was planning for this to be a short little thing, but I ended up taking 19 minutes of your time, so I appreciate it if you listened all the way to the end, and see you next time.